Hey guys, welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. Today we are discussing eating too much protein. Is it a thing? What happens when you do it? And any sort of the ramifications or myths that are out there about excess protein intake.
Yeah, I think I have quite a few worried clients. At the beginning, the beginning phases of our coaching together, sometimes we're like, oh, this seems like a lot of protein. Like, is this okay? My doctor says this is too much protein. My mom says this is too much protein.
Yeah.
all these different things. And it's just, protein can have certain symptoms associated with it at a certain point, but it's not likely the level that we're recommending for you.
There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of misinterpreted information.
Yeah.
So one of the first places that anyone will go for nutrition info is your basic RDAs and the USDA guidelines. And what those numbers tend to show are like the minimum amounts for a healthy individual as far as like what is required for the body to survive.
That's what the RDA is based on,
right.
Is minimum to avoid deficiency in any nutrient.
Correct.
So the RDA for any nutrient is basically the minimum to avoid deficiency, or what's seen as the minimum to support health in the average population.
Right.
So we know that there are problems with RDAs just to begin with because they're not individualized, and we are individualized. And you need to be able to fine-tune your nutrition to your own body. So protein is no exception there. And
the RDA for protein is what? 0.8?
0.8 grams per kilogram.
Yeah.
Yes. Or, if you're breaking down percentage of calories, it's 15 to 25% of your daily calorie intake. So even those two things, even though they're those two statements,
the same thing.
Those two statements are put out by, the same organizations,
right.
And frequently they don't match up. So that kind of shows you where the problem is that nobody can agree. And
right.
This is going to be probably an argument that people in the health industry have forever and ever because we just go back and forth.
Yeah,
Everyone has a different opinion. All the studies, there are some studies that show certain negative symptoms. There are some studies that show no negative symptoms at all. So I don't know if we'll ever really settle and find one single answer.
Well, we know what the answer is. That there are some people that don't.
We have an opinion, yes, but I think it's just always going to be an argument forever.
It's the right opinion. It's not even an opinion at this point, honestly. And I'm not afraid to say that.
Yeah.
So what we typically recommend, what I can personally say that I recommend is anywhere right around that 1 gram per pound mark. Anywhere on the lower end of the spectrum, I might have somebody at 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Up to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight on the higher side. And that can differ even more than that if I'm talking to someone that is very overweight to the point where it's skewing that number, in which case I would more than likely attribute protein intake closer to lean body mass. But just for sake of simplicity, I typically am in that 0.8 to 1.2 gram per pound range. And the only times I'm typically offering somebody or requesting somebody get less than a gram per pound of body weight is, like I said, if they're really overweight or if they just struggle so mightily to get protein in that I'm trying to make their day a little bit less stressful. It's not because more protein in that person's case would be detrimental. In fact, it would probably be beneficial, but it's more of a habit-based.
Well, we have to be realistic.
Right. A plan that they can actually work to hit.
I mean, and that's the goal with, the way that we do our coaching is trying to figure out, based on our knowledge and experience and education, yes, maybe this is where you should ideally be, but we also have to be realistic with your lifestyle
right.
and what's going to work for you. And we can still see a lot of good progress without it being what we might consider to be ideal.
Absolutely.
So
what would you consider overkill for protein intake?
So you might actually be a better person to answer that question because I think my protein recommendations are a little bit more nuanced. I tend to see a wider spectrum of clients because I work with people who aren't just looking to lose weight. A lot of my clients also struggle with certain health symptoms or chronic diseases, and those are all going to adjust your protein recommendation.
Well, I'm sure most people that are anywhere near over consuming protein are typically the ones that are trying to build as much muscle as possible, which are the people you don't typically work with.
Yes, that's true.
So
I typically don't have clients overdoing it on protein.
Yeah.
I have to struggle to get them to eat enough. But I would also say that based on like my normal client, their recommendations for protein are probably lower than your average client.
Sure. So with regards to overconsumption of protein, I would typically say that if you're at 1.5 grams per pound of body weight or higher, you're definitely overkill, especially if you're trying to build muscle in that period. So just real world example, if you're 200 pounds, that would be 300 grams of protein per day or more. And even above like 1.2, 1.25, like I said, that's where I kind of like to keep my upper limits, like 250 grams for a 200 pound individual. Cause even over that, there's not too much advantage there. And the only time I would even really be approaching those numbers is if I've got that type of person in a very low caloric deficit, which might seem counterintuitive. Like, wouldn't you want more protein if you're trying to build muscle? But when you are in a caloric deficit, you're going to be burning through more amino acids. You have higher risk of muscle degradation and loss. And so that's where we need that increased protein intake. Whereas if we're trying to build muscle, that's going to constitute a caloric surplus. And if we're in a caloric surplus, then we're not actually breaking down as much protein. We're not going through it as much. And so we actually have a lower protein requirement than if we were trying to lose weight.
Yes. Which again is opposite of what most people think.
Right.
Because you have these, smaller guys who are trying to put on a lot of muscle. They think they need to be eating
a pound of
300 grams of protein every day. And again, it is very much lined up to your current body size and your current lean mass. Because your body has a threshold based on your level of lean mass to how much of that protein it can actually use to repair and synthesize new protein or synthesize new tissue.
Right.
So yes, your needs do vary based on size and also based on goal. I think that's pretty obvious too. That's another major difference between Kyle's clients and my clients are, a lot of Kyle's clients are looking to gain muscle and get bigger. And that's not so much the case with my clients.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll say, just for sake of simplicity, we'll say 1.5 grams per pound of body weight is too much. It's
yes.
And it's not like,
it's not too much to the point where it's going to harm you if you're healthy.
That's what I was going to say.
We're talking about too much in terms of it's just a waste of your time and money. You don't need it. Your body can't do anything with it. Again, it's not going to hurt you as long as your body's healthy and you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah. There's going to be no negative health impacts to that.
Sure.
But like Alexa just said, it's a total waste of money.
Sure.
Because the other nutrients, your carbs and fats that you could be making those calories up with are going to be a lot cheaper. And that said, if you really enjoy protein and you just want to eat more of it, it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also the fact that, some of those calories that you're getting by eating too much protein might actually be better used getting more carbs in terms of even muscle growth. You know what I mean? To stimulate better muscle growth.
If we're talking optimizing your diet overall, then it's definitely a waste at that point, but it's not going to be a health issue.
No. So if you really like protein foods and you really want to eat X grams of protein, again, I guess it's fine if you prefer that over fats.
There's no real problem with it.
Yeah.
So that's protein over the entire day. The other question that gets brought up a lot is, what is too much protein in a single meal?
A lot of people worry about it.
And so this is something where part of this is tricky because there's a couple different parts of this that influence the answer. So one being the rate of protein synthesis and how much protein it takes to max that out. So protein synthesis is building muscle tissue. It's using the amino acids that are in your body and coming in from the diet and using that to build up new tissue. And at a certain level, that gets capped out to the point where if you increase your protein intake, you're not going to get any more benefit from that. Most of the time, The numbers I tend to see for that being the case are like 20 to 30 grams in a sitting. And again, that's going to be relative to how big you are, how much muscle mass you have on your frame.
Because it's all about how much or how many of those amino acids your body can use at a given time. It's just like sugar, right? It's just like blood sugar.
Yeah.
You put too much in that your body doesn't need at that moment, it's going to store it. So it's kind of the same when it comes to amino acids.
Well, so hold on. It's not the same.
It's not, I know it's not exactly the same,
it's not
but
the same.
Just to kind of paint a picture.
Yeah. So with protein intake, so say 30 grams is our cap on protein synthesis. Once we hit that, we've got protein synthesis operating at 100%. So when we go beyond that, say we eat 40 grams of protein in a meal, what happens then? Well, your body is set up to allow protein to pass through the stomach and into the small intestine at a slower rate if it's got more and more food coming in at a given time. So it's not just going to dump everything into the small intestine. It's going to slow that, what's the term for that, passing from the stomach into the small intestine? Dietitian.
Digestion.
I
don't know. I don't remember.
But so you increase the amount of nutrients in a particular meal, and the amount of
gastric emptying. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but there's another term for it. But
that's what it is.
It's that idea.
Go from the stomach to the
stomach. So your body will adapt so that it only releases what it knows it can absorb at a given time.
Yes.
So it slows down.
Yes. So what Kyle's saying is like, okay, so you take in 40 grams of protein in a meal. The 40 grams worth of amino acids are not getting dumped into your bloodstream at one time. You have the whole process of digestion, which we know takes several hours when it comes to protein digestion. So you're getting those amino acids in small amounts at a time. Right. And we know based on everything that we've talked about in terms of meal balance that, you know, if you eat some fiber, you eat some fats, you eat some carbs with that protein source, that's going to slow digestion even further. Right. So again, releasing small amounts of amino acids at a certain time.
Right. And the other aspect of this that those numbers don't take into account is amino acid concentration over time. And so while 20 or 30 grams of fast digesting proteins will typically cap out protein synthesis, your body will use those relatively quickly. And so unless you're consistently eating very regular small meals to keep that influx of amino acids coming, you're eventually going to run through those. And so if you have a larger meal with more protein, more fats, and more carbs that slows digestion overall, then you can actually keep protein synthesis elevated to 100% for a much longer period of time, which is going to lead to more muscle accrual if you're trying to build it, and also saving muscle in a caloric deficit.
Yes.
And so to give you guys a real number to focus on from some of the studies that I was looking into, one from Alan Aragon was roughly 0.25 grams, so a quarter per pound of, wait, let me say it again. So 0.25 grams of protein per pound of body weight per meal would be kind of a rough approximation for a max end beneficial wise. Again, this is not to say that over that is unhealthy, but as far as maxing out what your body can handle, 0.25 grams per pound per meal. So
do some math for me. What would
that's what I was about to do. So
what does that mean?
200-pound person, that's 50 grams in a meal.
Okay.
So 100-pound person, 25 grams in a meal.
Okay.
Something like that.
Got it.
So pretty much what we recommend.
Yeah, that's
anyways.
pretty standard. That's somewhere between a 4 and 8 ounce portion of protein in a meal.
Yeah, 4 to 8, 4 to 9, yeah. So yeah, pretty simple, 50 grams per 200-pound person per meal, and you're going to be right at the top end of maximum as far as what your body can actually use at a given time. And then again, anything over that is just kind of not necessary to achieve that protein synthesis, but it's again not going to be a bad thing to say.
So you want me to talk about this study?
I just didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't read this study, so you should probably talk about it.
So now, what does your body actually do with excess protein? So like we were saying earlier, if your body consumes excess carbohydrates or excess fats, it's actually not the same with excess protein intake.
It's not, but I was trying to paint the picture of like, if your body can't use it, it's going to do something else with it. These amino acids aren't just going to be floating around your bloodstream indefinitely. Your body has a system.
Right. So with carbohydrates, it can be stored as glycogen. With fats, it can obviously be stored as body fat. Pretty simple. But your body has no way to store protein for later use. And so what happens when you eat too much protein is it's typically converted into carbohydrates to be utilized through gluconeogenesis. Now there is functionality in the body to directly convert excess amino acids into alpha keto fatty acids. I can't remember the technical term, but it essentially converts amino acids into a fatty acid. However, the process by which that can happen is so small.
That's actually dependent on your gut bacteria, by the way.
Is it? Yeah. So the process by which that can happen is so small that it's nearly impossible to convert protein directly into body fat, which there's a lot of misconception around this. A lot of people, and even a lot of textbooks, will say that if you overconsume your body's needed protein amounts and you have the right amount of the other nutrients too, so adequate amounts of fats and carbs, that excess protein will just be converted to body fat. But we have much better studies more recently that really show that this is not the case. So there was a study done in 2012 that compared 3 different groups of people. Every single group was eating roughly 1,000 calories over their maintenance level every single day for 8 weeks. And the differing factor between these 3 groups was the percentage of protein intake in their diet. So group 1 had 5% of their calories from protein, roughly 47 grams for the entire day. Group 2 was 15% calories from protein, about 140 grams of protein per day. And then group 3 was 25% of the calories at around 230 grams of protein per day. And over those 8 weeks, so remember, everyone was balanced out so that calories were about 1,000 over maintenance. Carbs were all the same across the board. And so protein differed, and then whatever remaining calories were up were attributed to fats. So fats were a little bit different across the board as well. In group 1, so the low protein group, the group gained 7 total pounds. They gained 8 pounds of body fat, and they lost 1 pound of muscle mass. Group 2, that 15% calories from protein, gained 13 pounds, but they only gained 7 pounds from body fat, and they gained 6 pounds of muscle mass. And then group 3, the 25% protein group, gained 14 pounds, 7 of which were from body fat, 7 of which were from muscle mass. So to boil that all down, the group with the lowest amount of protein gained the most body fat. And the other 2 groups that had adequate and larger amounts of protein gained pretty much the same amount of body fat, but they also gained muscle mass. And so the conclusion from this piece of research was that the caloric intake and that excess calorie amount was what attributed to body fat gain, while protein intake had 0 effect on fat mass. And the only thing that protein affected was the amount of muscle mass that was gained in that period.
Yeah. And you have to think about this too, let's say that you're one of the participants in these groups, or, just looking at this from a numbers perspective, most people would say, well, I would rather gain 7 pounds than 14 pounds. But if we're looking at the breakdown between muscle and fat, these people that gained 13 pounds and 14 pounds came out of this looking much better because they were able to build more shape and build more muscle tissue that gives your body shape, even though, the fat gained was equal between the 2 groups, or relatively equal.
Right. And so I didn't take the time to do it, but if you were to calculate body fat percentages, body fat percentage would have gone up more significantly in group 1 than in groups 2 or 3.
So all those people out there worried when you start a diet with a little bit more protein and you see your weight go up a little bit, keep in mind that there's more happening under the surface than you realize.
Well, and one of the notes that was mentioned in the discussion part of the piece was that due to the fact that every macronutrient need was met and they were in such an excess caloric state, it was very likely that any excess protein that they didn't necessarily need at the time was likely converted to glucose through gluconeogenesis, and that increased carb concentration from the increased protein conversion would actually cause more water weight accrual, which would influence the amount of body fat and weight gain that the higher protein groups actually saw from the DEXA scans. So that might even be a more inflated body fat number than what was actually happening within them. And again, so this is all a massively over hypercaloric diet here.
Yeah.
And you're
so
talking
had
about...
they not been eating 1,000 calories over maintenance, the people in the higher protein groups may have still seen some weight gain, but it would have been a higher percentage of muscle and almost no fat at that point.
Right. There was no direct link between body fat increase and protein amount.
So the reason that all of these groups gained weight was just
calories.
The calorie surplus. Not the amount of protein,
right.
The calorie surplus.
Yeah.
And it's also important to note that, like, your body doesn't want to turn amino acids into glucose. It's a very laborious process.
Tough process. Yeah.
It's time consuming. It's a lot of work and a lot of energy for your body. Your body would rather not. And most people's bodies don't have the need to because, protein doesn't just go into your muscle tissue. Protein is required for every single cell in the entire body. All of the mechanics and the machinery in every single cell in your whole body is built from protein.
Right.
So you also have to consider that when you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, well, maybe my body doesn't need this much protein. This seems like a little too much. Like, I don't think this is useful for me. You do need protein and you do need enough, not just for, muscles, but to take care of your body and to, like, fuel your entire body.
Absolutely. So let's touch on these common myths that we hear.
The things that everybody fears.
Everybody's favorite problems with protein intake.
Number one, that it's going to hurt your kidneys.
So
this myth, I understand. I get it because it comes from a place that makes sense.
It's misinterpreted.
It's misinterpreted. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So when, like, your kidneys are responsible for filtering your blood and filtering the fluids and the waste products from the fluids in your body.
Yeah. It's like if you had a water filter.
Yes.
That's what your kidneys are.
So when your body breaks down protein, you have some byproducts that your kidneys are responsible for helping filter out. Okay. So people think that by, eating more protein, we're putting more stress on the kidneys, and eventually over time, the kidneys are going to be damaged or they're going to fail. That is not true. That's not how the body works. You eat more protein, and as long as you are taking care of your body, right? So you're supporting your body with the minerals that it needs. You're supporting your body with the water that it needs. Your kidneys will just upregulate this filtration process, and they'll just work a little bit harder. If your body has all the materials it needs, this work is going to be fine. It's what your body was meant to do. Your body will adapt.
Your body adapts to the stimulus, just like muscles adapt to a stimulus.
Just like anything else.
Your kidneys are not super fragile. So where this misinformation came from is that when you have somebody with kidney failure or kidney problems, and then you introduce more protein into the diet, yes, they will have issues, because if your body systems that do something are overly stressed with more work, then obviously that's going to be an issue. If, however, they are functioning properly and you are healthy, adding more work to that, they just upregulate and they're totally fine.
Yeah. The key here is, does your body have the materials that it needs to support that process? So again, if it does, then this isn't an issue. It's really, It's no issue at all. I think the other thing to be mindful of too is, like, yes, all of a sudden if you double your protein intake and you don't change your water intake, like, your kidneys might have to work a little bit harder to adjust. Water intake is very, very important because it keeps everything moving and it helps the kidneys do their job. So that would be, I think, the one exception, or the one thing to make sure you're aware of when you're increasing the protein in your diet, is that the water has to also increase with it.
Yeah, but I mean, water, if you're dehydrated, doesn't matter which protein intake it is, your kidneys are still they're still gonna be harmed.
Yeah.
In that case.
Yeah.
So again, protein is not the deciding factor there.
No, it's just something to be aware of. Right. Again, the more waste products that your body is going to produce, the more water you need to flush that stuff out. Yeah. So it really could be waste products coming from anywhere.
Right.
Toxin exposure, protein intake.
Stay hydrated, and if you're healthy, your kidneys are totally fine. Mm-hmm. And then the other one that less common, but you'll still hear, is the idea of calcium deficiency from protein intake. Do you get this one often? I feel like this might be your population.
No, actually, not so much this one. What I get a lot are comments about, the whole like acid-forming foods, alkaline foods. I actually get that more than the protein
acidity from protein intake.
Yes, increased acidity from protein intake, which also doesn't matter if you're giving your body the vitamins and minerals that it needs to function, because again, your body has a system to balance its pH naturally. Mm-hmm. And again, if your body doesn't have the materials it needs to do that job well, then yes, excess protein intake is going to make it worse. But it's not because of the protein specifically, it's because your body was missing the key things that it needed to get that job done. So I think the same applies then to the whole calcium question is, again, if your body has all the things it needs, it's going to perform for you. It's going to show up for you. It's going to do what it's supposed to do. It's just when we're missing even like a small amount of certain vitamins and minerals, that can throw everything off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, protein can actually increase the strength of your bones through increased insulin-like growth factor, increased actual calcium absorption, and vitamin D. So and especially when you take increased protein intake with resistance training, which is one of the biggest factors of bone density and strength, then you're going to be in a really good spot. So it's just not something to...
Yeah, strength training is actually much better than calcium supplements for older individuals looking to maintain more bone density.
Yeah, your body's going to adapt to a stimulus very quickly when it's imposed upon it. So.
Yeah, it's the same as muscle growth, right? So you put a stress on the muscle gets bigger and stronger.
Right.
Put a stress on the bones are going to reinforce themselves to be able to deal with more pressure and stress.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
So in case you didn't know, resistance training is good. You should do that.
Older individuals especially. And again, you don't have to be an older individual at the gym, like just throwing up crazy heavy weights, but it's all about stress on the body, stress in short, controlled, increments is good for you, and actually incredibly good for the aging process. Absolutely. We're finding new stuff every day on how small, controlled amounts of stress are great for your immune system, are great for aging, are great to, delay age-related illnesses and diseases and things like that. So, yes, strength training is a good thing.
Absolutely.
One thing I did also want to talk about, and this is I guess the one caveat to this whole thing is, and this again comes back down to your body not working the way that it should, is how protein can impact digestion, right? Because we know that protein is probably the most labor-intensive nutrient to digest.
Yeah.
We both agree, right?
It's one of the benefits of it.
It is. It's one of the benefits when it comes to overall calorie burning and the thermic effect of food and all of those things. Mm-hmm. However, to people with impaired digestion, that's actually not a great thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So eating too much protein at one time or too much protein in a certain day to somebody whose digestion isn't functioning optimally, that can just put more stress on your digestive system as a whole and can keep your digestive system from healing or just cause you more symptoms. So that's one thing to keep in mind is, if you already know that you have gut issues, I think it's best to first look at the form that you're getting your nutrition in. So, obviously the more, I don't want to say processed, but the more broken down that protein source is before you eat it, the easier it's going to be on digestion. Mm-hmm. So things like ground meats or softer type meats like fish or seafood are going to be easier for your body to break down than something like a steak or a chicken breast.
Right.
So you have to kind of consider that first. Obviously, a protein supplement or something like that is going to be the easiest digested of all of them. So if you have digestive issues, it's worth looking at how you get your protein in and maybe making some adjustments while your body's healing. But again, in somebody who's digesting the way that you should be or has optimal digestion, this protein intake shouldn't be a big deal.
Right. Goes back to the fact that if something's broken and you add more work to it, it's a problem.
It's going to cause more problems.
If it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Your body will adapt.
But I think it's just worth saying because
No,
sometimes
it is.
people do have,
It is worth saying.
digestive issues and don't attribute it to, or don't connect the dots between how protein may affect it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it all plays a part.
Yeah.
So to recap, overall, if you're at 1.5 grams or above per pound of body weight, you're more than likely way too high as far as usable, effective protein intake. Again, it's not going to have really effects on your health at all, but just something to note. If you're looking at a meal by meal basis, 0.25 grams per pound of body weight per meal is typically your mark, upper limit wise. And then other than that, if you're healthy, protein intake is not going to hurt you. Drink your water, resistance train, reap the benefits.
Yeah. Understand that, yes, everyone's needs are different, and your protein intake will depend on your goals, what your goals are, and what your, if any, what your underlying health conditions are. But eating a normal amount of protein as established by somebody who knows what they're doing isn't going to harm you.
Right.
So, but I understand the concerns of people.
But you don't need to be concerned. So thank you guys for tuning in this week. If you've got anything that you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out to myself at hypertrofit.com. You can find Alexa at therootedrd.com, and we will see you guys again next week.
We'll see you guys next week.